万门大学的小伙伴们，大家好，我是兰菲利博士，是莱特研究大学的应用神经科学教授。今天的讲座内容是关于吸引力。巴博士会给我们讲关于吸引力，但是不是我们想象的吸引力。已有的科研和科学研究发现，其实关于男性和女性的吸引力都会跟他们生育能力有关。男的脸的宽度或者女性的身材的比例都会影响到我们的吸引力。但是巴博士今天会讲一些更深入的一些吸引力的因素，而且有一些因素你可能想不到的。那我们现在去上课，看巴老师如何讲吸引力。
Hello, I'm Dr. Bob Wright, and I'm here today to talk to you about attraction. Who turns you on? What about them turns you on? And what does that mean when you settle down and you get married? Well, we all know that it isn't eternal bliss when we get married. But what is it that turns us on first of all? So, our Chief Vision Realization Officer, also known as our Chief Operating Officer, Barbara Burgess, is a cooperator. And inside of, if you look at a circle here and imagine, that's her. She's a cooperator. She's a feeling person. She wants everybody to get along well with each other. And she's petite. Her husband, Eric, is a regulator. He's a hard-driving guy. Imagine that we have Barbara, a cooperator, in a circle, and him in his circle. Well, inside of her is a regulator, and inside of him is a cooperator. So a little circle inside of hers is regulator, little circle inside of his is a cooperator. Ah, love. He's so strong. She feels so safe with him. It's all so beautiful and so wonderful until the kids come along. And then he says, these kids are out of control. We have to maintain order. And she says, you don't understand. They have feelings. You're hurting their feelings. And he says, you're letting them get away with too much. And she says, but you're too hard on them. And he says, I don't care. They're my kids. And she says, they're my kids too. And that's the beginning of Barbara developing what herself as a regulator, standing up to Eric and talking to Eric. And as she gets stronger, surprise of surprises, Eric starts relaxing. And he starts tapping himself as a cooperator. He starts having deeper feelings. He plays more with the kids. He relaxes more with the kids. Do they still fight? You betcha they still fight. They fight better now than they ever did before. And that's what we talk about in our book, The Heart of the Fight, A Couple's Guide to 15 Common Fights. What they really mean and how they can bring you closer. This didn't happen quite so fast and easily for them. First of all, Eric had to learn to say affirming, loving things to Barbara. But Barbara was kind of quiet. As a cooperator, she tended to sit back and care. But she had to also start saying more loving, affirming things to him. We call that accentuating the positive. Then, as they built up lots of positive, they could fight more productively. But they would be minimizing the negative. Their complaints were less in relationship to their compliments to each other. Barbara was also becoming stronger and stronger because guess what? In every one of their fights, nobody got the blame. Each of them learned to take 50% responsibility. Nobody got to blame anybody else, which was very, very tough because he was absolutely certain that she was the source of what was making him angry. And she was certain that his domineering ways were what was upsetting her, when in fact, she hadn't become strong enough yet, and he hadn't become soft enough yet. The law of complementarity, a cooperator and a regulator, love at first sight, and hell in every fight, until they started learning the rules of engagement. So we've got 3 of those rules right now. The first one is accentuate the positive. The second one is minimize the negative. The next one is nobody gets more than 50% of the blame, but now comes the really tough one. Each person has to take 100% responsibility for their own satisfaction. And for this one, I'm going to tell you about somebody else. Let's call her Harriet. Harriet started our year of transformation. And she spoke of her husband of over 30 years as, what's his name? That's not a compliment. And he referred to her as his first wife. Their children were both well over 25 years old. She was very unhappy, and she blamed him for her unhappiness. And when she came into the seminar, she tried to get all of us to agree that he was the source of her unhappiness. If only he would change, then everything would be great. You see, she was the regulator and he was the cooperator. And she was always driving. She would come in the door at night and he'd be watching TV. And she'd say, "What are you doing watching that stupid show?" And he'd roll his eyes and sit back in his easy chair and try to ignore her. Well, she certainly wasn't taking 100% responsibility for her own satisfaction. She was giving him 100% responsibility for her dissatisfaction. But in the seminar, everyone has agreed to take 100% responsibility for their own satisfaction. And as she started asking herself, what would that mean if I were happy, even if he's a vegetable watching television? That was really hard for her to consider. And then she was talking to Dr. Judith one night. And Dr. Judith said to her, "Well, if you want to be adored, you should probably work on becoming adorable." That did not compute to her. But she did start to understand that she was responsible for her own happiness and not him. She started coming into the house differently. She started greeting him with a kiss. And he goes, "Whoa, who is this coming into my house?" She starts inviting him to seminars. And he says, "No, I don't want any of that." But little by little, they start talking. They start taking walks together again. They start falling more and more deeply in love with each other. This regulator driving woman and this cooperator, easygoing guy, he's actually getting stronger and beginning to voice his opinions. And she's relaxing and becoming more easygoing. So this law of complementarity is facilitated by these rules of engagement. The first one, accentuate the positive. The second one, limit the negative. Try and get at least 3 positives for every negative, or more if you can. Now, positives can be just listening, paying attention to each other. The third one, nobody gets more than 50% of the blame. And each person gets 100% responsibility for their own satisfaction and happiness in life. That's really a tough one. But those rules help Barbara and Eric do amazing things. He's a hard-driving sales executive, and she's our hard-driving chief operating officer. And they both have very busy lives. The number of solutions that they have to come up with to solve the problems they face in life are huge. When I asked Barbara to stay 2 days extra with us here in China, she gave me the silent treatment. She immediately shut up, didn't answer me, went into her computer, and then the other staff came and sat at the table and they said, "What's going on?" I said, "I'm being punished." And she made a joke and we talked about it a little bit. She knew that we needed her here, and she knew that he would be very angry if she stayed 2 extra days. You see, we had been in Bali already for over a week, which is a very long time for her to be away from her 2 children. But she knew they would work it out, and she eventually started talking to me again, and we have been working together, enjoying ourselves here in Beijing at One Man. So I'd like to thank you for joining me, and I want you to consider, what is it that turns you on? We'll talk a lot more about that later on when we get into our episodes on singlehood.